This comment was left on my most recent video, which was a duet with another creator who was talking about righteous indignation, or a wrathful love, as he calls it. This comment is not incorrect, but I want to clarify a little bit about the role of anger in the Buddhist traditions, at least as I understand it. In the Buddhist traditions, anger is indeed considered one of the kleshas, that is, the afflictive emotions that include things like jealousy and anxiety. In fact, anger is considered one of the three poisons that lie at the root of all suffering: desire or greed, hatred or ill will, and ignorance or delusion. Here I think it's useful to introduce the idea that there are really two different kinds of anger. The first is the anger of self-preservation, the kind that arises when somebody threatens you or attacks you physically. The second is the anger of protection, which arises when somebody is threatening or hurting somebody that you love or something that you love. Now, in my understanding, which could be completely wrong, the Buddhist traditions focus mainly on this first type of anger, the anger of self-preservation, because out of that form of anger often arise all kinds of harmful actions, harmful words that are said, punches that are thrown, even unaliving somebody in the so-called heat of the moment. As I see it, the second form of anger, which is more of a protective form of anger, can actually be quite sacred and beautiful. It's the anger that arises when we see somebody being abused or hurt, or when we learn about some environmental atrocity, or we learn about some marginalized groups being targeted and oppressed, and so on. This is the anger that arises out of love. That said, our love for the world, our compassion for other beings, other humans, other species, it can show up in lots of other ways besides anger, most notably in grief and anxiety, fear, helplessness, all kinds of things. Here's where I want to circle back to one of my mentors and teachers, Joanna Macy. I mentioned her in a previous video called The Great Turning, wherein I talked about the three spheres of involvement that one can participate in the Great Turning. Go check it out if you're interested. But in this video, I want to talk about something that she has developed called the work that reconnects. Along with Thich Nhat Hanh and David Loy and others, Joanna Macy is part of a tradition that's been called engaged Buddhism, which certainly does not encourage detachment, at least in the ultimate sense, but actually encourages engagement. As Joanna sees it, when we engage more deeply with the earth and with the earth community, we start to feel these feelings that include anger and grief and all kinds of things. Her main idea and the purpose of the work is that these emotions are generally too overwhelming for one person to bear. We tend to shut them down. But she encourages us to process these emotions together. The work that reconnects includes many different group exercises, and one of them is my favorite. It's called the Truth Mandala. And in this exercise, there's like a blanket that is laid out, and there on each of the four corners of the blanket represents different emotions that one might feel when we consider the ecological crisis and the injustices of the world. In one corner of the blanket, or in this square space, there is a stone, and the stone represents fear. In another corner of the blanket, there are some dried leaves, and that represents sorrow or grief. And in another corner of the blanket, there is a stick, which is not meant to be used to hit people, but just to hold on to when one is expressing their rage. And in the other corner, there is a bowl, an empty bowl, and this represents our feelings of not knowing, our feelings of lack, our feelings of powerlessness. The main part of the exercise is for people to enter the mandala one at a time and to speak their truth, whether it's fear of, like, I don't think we're going to make it through this, I think the world is going to end, or whether it's sorrow, like for all of the species that have been lost and all of the groups that are being oppressed and so forth. Or maybe it's, again, just a sense of not knowing what the hell to do, a sense of powerlessness, or maybe it is this righteous anger that we've been talking about. So after somebody has entered into the mandala and expressed whatever emotion they're feeling most strongly, everybody else in the groups who has witnessed this, they simply say, I hear you. So the point of this particular exercise, the Truth Mandala, is to acknowledge that all of these feelings are valid, all of these feelings are welcome, and indeed all of these feelings are born out of love. So in sum, the kind of anger that arises out of love is not only not harmful, it can be extremely helpful in our fight for ecological sustainability and social justice. And although it can be very helpful to cultivate some degree of detachment from one's difficult emotions, if that detachment becomes too great, or if it becomes a detachment from reality itself, well then that ain't no good.